For 18 months, they treated her like she was invisible. Just another secretary scheduling meetings and filing reports. But when foreign operatives infiltrated America's most secure nuclear facility, the quiet woman with the coffee pot became the only person who could prevent World War III. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine Reed had perfected the art of being overlooked long before she ever set foot in Fortress Ridge Command Center. At 34, she moved through the underground nuclear facility like a shadow, clipboard in hand, scheduling briefings and organizing classified documents while the real decision makers, at least that's what they called themselves, conducted their important business of safeguarding America's nuclear arsenal. The morning briefing room hummed with the usual energy of men who controlled weapons capable of ending civilization. General William Harper strode around the strategic display, gesturing broadly as he outlined defense protocols. Colonel Thomas Bradley cracked jokes about outdated Soviet technology. Major Lisa Anderson reviewed personnel files with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned her own authority. "Coffee's ready in the break room," Catherine said quietly from her corner desk, consulting her meticulously maintained schedule book. "And the Pentagon briefing is confirmed for 1400 hours. "Thank you, Reed," General Harper replied without looking up from his classified reports. "We'll handle the strategic details from here." The dismissal stung, but Catherine had grown accustomed to it. She'd been at Fortress Ridge for 18 months, and the routine never varied. She observed, she organized, she scheduled, and they treated her like an efficient piece of office equipment. To them, she was just the secretary who'd somehow gotten security clearance, probably through some administrative necessity. What they didn't know, what nobody at Fortress Ridge knew, was that the quiet woman with the coffee pot had once been Dr. Catherine Reed, nuclear systems engineer with a PhD in theoretical physics from MIT. The small metal box, hidden in her apartment, contained a Department of Defense commendation for her work on next-generation nuclear safeguards, earned through 6 years of designing the very systems that protected America's most dangerous weapons. She had been part of the elite team that developed the fail-safe protocols, currently protecting every nuclear missile in the U.S. arsenal. Her algorithms were embedded in the command structures that prevented unauthorized launches. Her security frameworks were the invisible barriers, standing between global peace and nuclear annihilation. But that was before the incident at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, before the security breach that had compromised her team's work, before the investigation that cleared her of wrongdoing but destroyed her career anyway, before she'd requested a transfer to administrative duties, where her dangerous knowledge couldn't be used against the country she'd sworn to protect. During afternoon security briefings, when Colonel Bradley discussed routine protocol updates, Catherine would quietly take notes in her personal journal, not meeting minutes, but technical observations about system vulnerabilities and procedural gaps. She tried sharing these insights exactly once, during her 3rd week at Fortress Ridge. "Sir, if I may suggest," she'd begun, standing with her handwritten security analysis, "the current authentication protocols have a potential vulnerability." "In the Reed," General Harper had interrupted, his voice carrying barely concealed irritation. "Your job is to schedule meetings and maintain filing systems. Leave the nuclear security to those of us who actually understand these systems." The room had erupted in polite chuckles. Colonel Bradley had made a joke about promoting her to Secretary of Defense. Major Anderson had suggested maybe she could reorganize the lunch schedule while she was at it. Catherine had simply sat down, returned to her notepad, and never offered technical input again. But she never stopped observing. Every morning, she arrived at Fortress Ridge 2 hours early, using her administrative access to review system logs and maintenance reports. While the command staff slept off their previous evening's poker games and war stories, Catherine studied the facility's technical infrastructure with the trained eye of someone who designed similar systems. She memorized every security protocol, every backup system, every potential failure point in the complex web of safeguards that kept America's nuclear weapons under control. Her official duties included maintaining personnel schedules and organizing classified documents. But between those tasks, she conducted her own informal security audits, identifying weaknesses that could be exploited by sophisticated adversaries. She knew this facility better than officers who'd been stationed here for years. When Sergeant First Class Daniel Lopez wondered why she always carried that thick technical manual, she simply explained it was backup reference material. When Corporal Jake Wilson asked why she never joined their evening card games, she said she preferred quiet time for reading. Nobody pressed further. Nobody was curious enough to look deeper. They saw what they expected to see: a competent secretary who'd somehow ended up in a high-security environment. They never noticed how her eyes tracked the security camera rotations during casual conversations. They never saw how she instinctively identified system access points and communication vulnerabilities wherever she went. They never realized that the woman they dismissed as just administrative support was actually conducting the most thorough security assessment in the facility's history. In the break room, officers would joke about her intensity. "Look at Reed." Colonel Bradley would laugh, studying those technical manuals like they contained the secrets of the universe. They had no idea that those manuals did contain secrets about nuclear command systems, launch protocols, and security vulnerabilities that could be exploited by anyone with sufficient technical knowledge and hostile intent. While they played cards and shared stories about their glory days, she was identifying patterns in system maintenance logs that suggested someone was probing their defenses. The facility's internet connection was heavily monitored, but Catherine's administrative access allowed her to review intelligence reports that painted an increasingly troubling picture. Foreign cyber capabilities were advancing rapidly. State-sponsored hacking groups were targeting nuclear facilities worldwide. Professional infiltrators were moving into position, not the usual script kiddies with basic malware, but trained operatives with sophisticated tools and the patience to execute long-term operations. She'd filed 2 separate reports about unusual network activity she'd detected during routine administrative tasks, subtle probing attempts that suggested professional reconnaissance rather than random attacks. Both reports had been dismissed as administrative overcaution and filed away without investigation. But Catherine kept watching, kept analyzing, kept preparing, because somewhere in the back of her mind, in the part of her brain that had spent 6 years designing nuclear security systems, she had the growing certainty that Fortress Ridge was about to face something it wasn't prepared for. And when that moment came, when the card game stopped and the jokes died and the fate of millions hung in the balance, she would be ready. Question was whether anyone would finally be willing to listen to the woman they'd been ignoring for 18 months. The first anomaly appeared on a Tuesday morning at 0347 hours, buried in routine system maintenance logs that only Catherine bothered to read. Catherine stared at her computer screen in the pre-dawn darkness of her small apartment, coffee growing cold as she analyzed the data that had kept her awake all night. The anomaly wasn't just unusual, it was impossible under normal circumstances. Someone had accessed the facility's secondary authentication servers using credentials that shouldn't exist. She discovered it buried in routine maintenance logs, the kind of technical documentation that crossed her desk every morning as part of her administrative duties. While everyone else saw meaningless strings of code and timestamp data, Catherine saw something far more troubling: evidence of sophisticated reconnaissance by someone who understood nuclear command systems better than they should. The access pattern was subtle, almost elegant in its execution. Whoever had done this knew exactly which systems to probe and which to avoid. They'd tested the facility's defenses without triggering any of the standard security alerts, using techniques that suggested military-grade cyber warfare training. Catherine opened her personal laptop, a device not connected to any government networks, and began cross-referencing the anomaly with her own extensive files. These weren't official documents. They were her private collection of research, analysis, and technical specifications that she'd accumulated during her years as Dr. Catherine Reed, nuclear systems engineer. The truth was more complex than anyone at Fortress Ridge imagined. Catherine hadn't just worked on nuclear security systems. She'd designed many of the fundamental protocols that protected America's most dangerous weapons. Her doctoral thesis at MIT had revolutionized nuclear command authentication. Her work at Lawrence Livermore had created the fail-safe algorithms that prevented unauthorized launches. She'd been part of a classified team that developed the multi-factor nuclear authentication protocol, known internally as MNP, the invisible barrier that stood between nuclear weapons and anyone who might want to use them without authorization. Her algorithms were embedded in every nuclear facility in the United States, including Fortress Ridge, but her career had ended abruptly 3 years ago when a security breach at Lawrence Livermore exposed sensitive technical details about nuclear command systems. Foreign intelligence services had gained access to classified research, including some of Catherine's work on authentication vulnerabilities. The investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing. The breach had been caused by inadequate network security, not personnel compromise, but the damage to her career was irreversible. Dr. Reed, her supervisor, had explained during their final meeting, "Your clearance is being maintained, but we feel it's best if you move to a less sensitive position. The work you've done is too valuable to risk further exposure." Translation: she knew too much about America's nuclear security vulnerabilities, and her continued involvement in active research posed an unacceptable risk. Better to hide her away in an administrative role where her dangerous knowledge couldn't be compromised again. So, Dr. Catherine Reed had become Catherine Reed's secretary. Her PhD in theoretical physics became irrelevant. Her 6 years of nuclear systems expertise became a secret she couldn't share. Her intimate knowledge of America's most critical defense systems became a burden she carried alone. But that knowledge hadn't disappeared. Every technical manual she read, every system log she reviewed, every security protocol she observed, all of it was filtered through the mind of someone who understood nuclear command systems at the deepest level. She recognized patterns that others missed. She identified vulnerabilities that trained security officers overlooked. She saw threats that experienced intelligence analysts dismissed as routine. The anomaly on Tuesday morning was exactly the kind of threat she'd been trained to recognize. Someone was systematically mapping Fortress Ridge's defensive systems, using techniques sophisticated enough to avoid detection by standard security measures. The access pattern suggested they were specifically targeting the facility's nuclear command infrastructure. Catherine opened her secure files and began documenting everything she'd discovered. The unauthorized access had occurred through a series of subtle probes, each one testing a different aspect of the facility's security architecture. The intruder had examined authentication protocols, command verification systems, and emergency override procedures, exactly the kind of reconnaissance that would precede a serious attack. More troubling was the technical sophistication involved. Whoever had done this understood nuclear command systems well enough to know which vulnerabilities to exploit. This wasn't random hacking or opportunistic intrusion. This was professional-grade cyber warfare targeting America's nuclear arsenal. Catherine spent the next 4 hours analyzing the intrusion, cross-referencing attack patterns with her knowledge of nuclear security vulnerabilities. By the time she needed to leave for work, she had a clear picture of what Fortress Ridge was facing: a systematic reconnaissance operation by adversaries with intimate knowledge of American Nuclear command systems. The question was how to report. Her previous attempts to share technical insights had been dismissed with barely concealed condescension. General Harper and his staff saw her as administrative support, not as someone qualified to assess nuclear security threats. They had no idea that the woman organizing their meetings had designed many of the systems. They were supposed to protect at 0630 hours. Catherine arrived at Fortress Ridge with a detailed technical report documenting the security breach. She'd spent hours preparing the analysis, translating her findings into language that non-technical officers could understand while providing enough detail to demonstrate the severity of the threat. The morning briefing was already underway when she knocked on the conference room door. General Harper looked up with barely concealed irritation as she entered with her report. "Sir, I need to brief you on a significant security anomaly I discovered in yesterday's system logs," she began, setting her analysis on the conference table. "Reed, we're in the middle of operational planning," Colonel Bradley replied dismissively. "Can't this wait until normal administrative hours?" "Sir, this involves potential unauthorized access to nuclear command systems. I believe we may be facing active reconnaissance by hostile." "That's enough," General Harper interrupted sharply. "Reed, you're a secretary, not a security analyst. We have trained professionals handling cyber threats." Major Anderson leaned forward with a patronizing smile. "Catherine, we appreciate your vigilance, but network security is handled by specialized teams. Your job is to maintain schedules and filing systems." Catherine felt the familiar frustration rising. They were dismissing a legitimate threat because they couldn't see past her administrative role. "Sir, with respect, I have extensive experience with nuclear command systems. The attack pattern I've identified suggests experience." "Colonel." Bradley's eyebrows raised. What kind of experience could a secretary have with nuclear systems? The room fell silent. Catherine realized she'd reached a crossroads. She could retreat to her administrative role and hope someone else would eventually recognize the threat. Or she could reveal the truth about her background and risk everything on the chance that they might finally listen. She looked around the room at faces that had dismissed her expertise for 18 months. At officers who controlled America's most dangerous weapons, but couldn't recognize when those weapons were under attack. At the very people who needed her knowledge most, but were too blinded by assumptions to accept it. The kind of experience that comes from designing the systems you're supposed to be protecting, Catherine said quietly. The room erupted in confused murmurs and skeptical glances. General Harper's face cycled through surprise, disbelief, and something that might have been anger. "What exactly are you claiming, Reed?" Catherine took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would either change everything or end her career at Fortress Ridge permanently. "I'm claiming that I'm Dr. Catherine Reed, former nuclear systems engineer at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I designed the multi-factor nuclear authentication protocol that's currently protecting this facility." The silence in the briefing room was deafening. General Harper's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Colonel Bradley's pen froze over his notepad. Major Anderson's confident expression cracked into confusion. "That's impossible," Harper said slowly. "NAP is classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people in the entire country know those technical details." Catherine opened her analysis folder and pulled out a document that made every officer in the room lean forward. It was a technical schematic showing the internal architecture of Fortress Ridge's nuclear command systems, details that shouldn't exist outside of the most secure government facilities. "An NAP protocol, version 3.7, Catherine said quietly. "Implemented here 18 months ago. Triple redundant authentication with quantum encrypted verification keys. I wrote the original code." Colonel Bradley grabbed the schematic, his eyes widening as he recognized information that was supposedly known to fewer than a dozen people worldwide. "How do you have access to this?" Because I created it. Catherine's voice carried the quiet authority of absolute expertise. The anomaly I detected yesterday represents a systematic probe of the MNAP system's external interfaces. Someone is mapping our authentication protocols with sophisticated tools that suggest they understand the system's architecture. Major Anderson found her voice first. If this is true, if you really designed these systems, why are you working as a secretary? Catherine's smile was bitter. Because 3 years ago, my team's work was compromised in a security breach at Lawrence Livermore. Foreign intelligence services gained access to sensitive technical details about nuclear command vulnerabilities. The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing, but my career in active research was over. She gestured toward the schematic that had captured everyone's attention. The government decided that my knowledge of nuclear security systems made me too valuable to risk in a frontline position. So they gave me a nice administrative job where I could be useful without being vulnerable. General Harper was studying the technical documentation with growing alarm. As someone who'd spent his career managing nuclear weapons, he recognized legitimate technical expertise when he saw it. The level of detail in Catherine's analysis wasn't something that could be faked or stolen. It required intimate knowledge of systems that existed only in the most classified environments. Dr. Reed, he said slowly, using her academic title. For the first time in 18 months. Walk us through what you've discovered. Catherine approached the strategic display and began highlighting specific elements of the security breach. The intrusion occurred through a series of coordinated probes targeting our external authentication interfaces. The attacker used legitimate administrative credentials to access system logs, maintenance schedules, and personnel databases. She pointed to specific data points on her analysis. But they also probed deeper systems backup authentication servers, emergency override protocols, and command verification pathways. This isn't random hacking. This is professional reconnaissance by someone who understands nuclear command architecture. Colonel Bradley was taking notes as fast as he could write. What kind of capabilities would an attacker need to conduct this type of operation? State-level resources, Catherine replied without hesitation. Advanced persistent threat capabilities, probably supported by a major intelligence service. The tools they used suggest access to classified technical specifications about American nuclear command systems. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If Catherine was right, and her technical expertise suggested she was, then Fortress Ridge was facing a threat far more sophisticated than anything they'd prepared for. Dr. Reed, Major Anderson said carefully, what's the worst-case scenario we're looking at? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain the unthinkable to people who'd never studied nuclear security vulnerabilities. The MNAP system is designed with multiple fail-safes to prevent unauthorized launches. But if an attacker has sufficient knowledge of the system's architecture and access to the right authentication credentials, they could potentially bypass those safeguards. General Harper's face went pale. You're talking about unauthorized nuclear launch capabilities. I'm talking about the theoretical possibility of someone with advanced technical knowledge and hostile intent gaining control of nuclear weapons. Systems. Catherine's voice was clinical, professional, but everyone in the room could hear the underlying terror. The reconnaissance pattern I've identified suggests they're mapping exactly the kind of vulnerabilities that could make such an attack possible. The room fell silent as the full scope of the threat became clear. They weren't just dealing with a security breach or data theft. They were potentially facing an attempt to gain control of America's nuclear arsenal. Corporal Jake Wilson, who'd been quietly observing from the back of the room, raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, if you designed these systems, can you stop whatever they're planning? Catherine looked at the young soldier with something approaching respect. While the senior officers had spent 18 months dismissing her expertise, Wilson had always treated her with courtesy and genuine interest in her technical knowledge. "I can help," she said simply. "But I'll need access to systems and resources that have been denied to me for the past 18 months. I'll need to be treated as a technical expert rather than administrative support." General Harper was already reaching for his secure phone. "Dr. Reed, as of this moment, you have whatever access you need. What's your first recommendation?" Catherine opened her analysis folder to reveal pages of technical diagrams and security assessments that she'd been developing during her months of quiet observation. "We need to implement immediate defensive measures to prevent further reconnaissance. Then we need to identify the source of the intrusion and determine exactly what information has been compromised." She paused, looking around the room at faces that were finally taking her seriously. "But most importantly, we need to prepare for the possibility that this reconnaissance is just the beginning. If I'm right about the sophistication of this operation, the real attack is still coming." Colonel Bradley was already organizing response teams. "How much time do we have?" Catherine's expression was grim as she considered everything she'd observed during her months of quiet analysis. "Based on the attack pattern and the level of reconnaissance they've conducted, I estimate we have less than 72 hours before they're ready to move to the next phase, which is—" Catherine's green eyes carried the cold certainty of someone who understood exactly what they were facing. "Active intrusion into nuclear command systems. If they succeed, they won't just be gathering intelligence about our weapons, they'll be in position to control them." The briefing room exploded into urgent activity as officers began coordinating defensive measures and intelligence assessments. But Catherine remained focused on her technical analysis, already working on countermeasures that might prevent the unthinkable. For 18 months, she'd been the invisible secretary that nobody noticed. Now she was the only person who might be able to prevent a nuclear catastrophe. The question was whether 18 months of preparation would be enough to stop an enemy that had been planning this operation for much longer. Dr. Nikolai Orlov had been planning the infiltration of Fortress Ridge for 3 years, ever since his intelligence service had acquired the stolen technical specifications from the Lawrence Livermore breach. As one of Russia's most skilled cyber warfare specialists, he understood that gaining control of American nuclear weapons required more than just technical expertise. It required intimate knowledge of the systems, the people, and the vulnerabilities that existed at the intersection of technology and human nature. But Catherine Reed didn't know about Orlov yet. What she knew was that the reconnaissance attack she'd detected was just the beginning of something far more sophisticated and dangerous than anyone at Fortress Ridge had imagined. Over the next 48 hours, Catherine worked with barely 3 hours of sleep, transforming Fortress Ridge's approach to nuclear security. Her first priority was implementing what she called defensive hardening technical measures designed to prevent further unauthorized access to critical systems. "We need to assume that our standard security protocols have been compromised," she explained to the emergency security briefing that General Harper had convened. "The reconnaissance pattern suggests they have detailed knowledge of our authentication systems, which means they've probably identified ways to bypass our normal defenses." She stood at the strategic display, pointing to technical diagrams that most of the officers couldn't fully understand but recognized as critically important. "I'm implementing emergency protocol modifications that will create additional authentication barriers. Think of it as changing all the locks after someone has stolen your keys." Colonel Bradley was taking detailed notes. "How long will these modifications take to implement?" "The basic defensive measures can be active within 6 hours, Catherine replied. "But comprehensive security hardening will require at least 72 hours, assuming we don't face active interference." Major Anderson raised her hand. "What kind of interference are you expecting?" Catherine's expression was grim. "If this is truly a state-sponsored operation, and all the evidence suggests it is, they won't just wait passively while we strengthen Our defenses. They'll accelerate their timeline and move to active intrusion before we can fully protect ourselves. She was right. While Catherine worked to implement her security modifications, Orlov's team was already moving to the next phase of their operation. 3,000 miles away, in a facility that officially didn't exist, Pavel Morozov was preparing for the most ambitious cyber warfare operation in history. The American facility is implementing defensive countermeasures, Morozov reported to his commander. Our reconnaissance has been detected by someone with advanced technical knowledge. Orlov studied the intelligence reports with professional interest. How advanced? The countermeasures suggest doctoral-level expertise in nuclear command systems. Possibly someone who worked on the original MNAP protocol design. This was unexpected. Orlov's intelligence indicated that Fortress Ridge was staffed with standard military personnel and security specialists. The presence of someone with advanced nuclear systems expertise complicated the operation significantly. Can we overcome their defensive measures? Morozov's smile was cold. We have advantages they don't know about. The Lawrence Livermore breach gave us access to the original MNP source code, including several backdoors that were never publicly disclosed. If we move quickly, we can exploit these vulnerabilities before they can be patched. Meanwhile, at Fortress Ridge, Catherine was discovering exactly how sophisticated their adversaries were. The defensive modifications she'd implemented were working. Unauthorized access attempts were being blocked and logged, but the attack patterns she was seeing suggested capabilities that exceeded her worst-case estimates. They're not just probing our defenses, she reported to General Harper during their evening briefing. They're systematically testing every modification I've implemented, looking for weaknesses in real time. This indicates they have access to technical specifications that should be impossible to obtain. Sergeant First Class Daniel Lopez, who'd been monitoring communications intercepts, raised a troubling possibility. Dr. Reed, what if they have access to the original design documents for the systems you created? The question hit Catherine like a physical blow. If hostile intelligence services had gained access to her original technical specifications, the classified documentation that had been compromised in the Lawrence Livermore breach, then they would know about vulnerabilities that even she had forgotten. The Lawrence Livermore breach, she said slowly. 3 years ago, foreign intelligence services gained access to classified research, including some of my work on nuclear command systems. General Harper leaned forward. What specific information was compromised? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, remembering the devastating security investigation that had ended her career. Technical specifications for MNAP protocol vulnerabilities. Theoretical attack vectors that could be used to bypass authentication systems. Documentation of emergency override procedures that were never meant to be implemented. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Their adversaries weren't just skilled hackers attempting to break into nuclear systems. They were sophisticated operators with access to the original blueprints, including information about vulnerabilities that had been built into the systems for legitimate emergency purposes. Dr. Reed, Colonel Bradley said carefully, are you saying they might have access to deliberate backdoors in our nuclear command systems? I'm saying they might have access to emergency override protocols that were designed to allow authorized personnel to maintain control of nuclear weapons under extreme circumstances. Catherine's voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. Those protocols were never meant to be used except in the most extreme national emergency. But if someone has the technical specifications, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood that emergency override protocols, in the wrong hands, could become the very tools used to seize control of America's nuclear arsenal. Corporal Wilson, who'd been quietly monitoring system logs, suddenly looked up from his workstation. Ma'am, we have a problem. I'm seeing new, unauthorized access attempts using credentials that shouldn't exist. Catherine moved quickly to his console, her trained eye immediately recognizing the attack pattern. They're using emergency authentication codes. These aren't supposed to be active except during declared national emergencies. How is that possible? Major Anderson demanded. Because someone with access to the original technical specifications has figured out how to activate protocols that were designed to override normal security measures. Catherine's fingers flew across the keyboard as she analyzed the intrusion. Attempt. They're not just trying to break into our systems, they're using our own emergency procedures against us. The attack was more sophisticated than anything Catherine had anticipated. The adversaries were systematically activating emergency override protocols that would allow them to bypass the very security measures she'd spent years designing. They were using the nuclear command system's own safeguards as weapons. Can you stop them? General Harper asked. Catherine studied the attack pattern, her mind racing through technical possibilities and defensive countermeasures. I can try to disable the emergency protocols, but that's like removing the safety systems from a nuclear reactor. If we face a legitimate emergency, we'll have no way to maintain control of our weapons. And if we don't disable them? Catherine's expression was grim. Then we're potentially giving hostile actors the tools they need to seize control of our nuclear arsenal. The room fell silent as everyone grasped the terrible choice they were facing. Disable the emergency protocols and lose the ability to control their own weapons during a crisis. Keep the protocols active and risk having them exploited by enemies who understood the systems better than the people currently protecting them. Dr. Reed, General Harper said slowly, what's your recommendation? Catherine looked around the room at faces that had finally learned to trust her expertise, just as that expertise was being pushed beyond its limits. I recommend we prepare for the possibility that our standard defensive measures won't be enough. We need to consider options that go beyond technical solutions. What kind of options? Catherine's green eyes carried the cold calculation of someone who understood that preventing nuclear catastrophe might require actions that violated every protocol in the manual. The kind of options that nobody wants to consider until they're the only choices left. Outside, in the darkness beyond Fortress Ridge's perimeter, sophisticated adversaries were making their final preparations for an operation that would either succeed spectacularly or fail catastrophically. The real battle was about to begin. The attack began at 0247 hours on a Friday morning, during the shift change when security protocols were most vulnerable to exploitation. Catherine was in the command center, having barely slept for 3 days while implementing defensive countermeasures, when every alarm in Fortress Ridge began screaming simultaneously. We have multiple unauthorized access attempts across all primary systems, Sergeant Lopez reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. Someone's using administrative credentials to access nuclear command interfaces. Catherine's worst fears were being realized in real time. The adversaries weren't just probing their defenses anymore. They were actively penetrating the systems that controlled America's nuclear arsenal. She moved quickly to the primary monitoring station, her trained eye immediately recognizing the attack pattern. They're using a coordinated multi-vector approach, she announced to the rapidly assembling crisis team. Simultaneous attacks on authentication servers, command verification systems, and emergency override protocols. General Harper arrived in the command center still fastening his uniform, his face grave as he absorbed the scope of the crisis. Dr. Reed, how bad is this? Catherine's fingers flew across multiple keyboards as she analyzed the intrusion in real time. They've gained access to secondary authentication systems, and they're systematically working their way toward primary nuclear command interfaces. At current penetration rates, they'll have access to launch authorization protocols within 6 hours. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Everyone understood that launch authorization protocols represented the final barrier between nuclear weapons and anyone who might want to use them without legitimate authority. "Can we stop them?" Colonel Bradley demanded. "I'm implementing emergency containment procedures," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the crisis. "But they're using technical specifications that give them detailed knowledge of our defensive capabilities. Every countermeasure I deploy, they're prepared to overcome." Major Anderson was coordinating with external security agencies, her radio crackling with reports from facilities across the country. "We're receiving similar reports from other nuclear installations. This appears to be a coordinated assault on multiple targets simultaneously." The scope of the operation was staggering. Catherine had expected a sophisticated attack on Fortress Ridge, but this was something far more ambitious: a systematic assault on America's entire nuclear command infrastructure. "They're not just targeting us," she realized aloud. "They're targeting every facility that has nuclear command authority. This is an attempt to seize control of the entire American nuclear arsenal." Dr. Patricia Williams, the visiting nuclear systems specialist who'd arrived that morning for a routine inspection, approached Catherine's workstation with obvious concern. "Dr. Reed, I've been monitoring the attack patterns. These aren't random intrusion attempts. They're following a systematic methodology that suggests intimate knowledge of MNAP protocol architecture." Catherine looked up from her screens, recognizing in Dr. Williams someone who understood the technical implications of what they were facing. "The Lawrence Livermore breach. They have access to the original technical specifications, including documentation of vulnerabilities that were never meant to be publicized. Which means they know about backdoors that even most security personnel don't know exist." Dr. Williams confirmed grimly. The two women worked together, their combined expertise, creating a defense that was more sophisticated than anything the adversaries had anticipated. But even with doctoral-level knowledge of nuclear systems, they were fighting an uphill battle against opponents who had been preparing for this operation for years. "I'm seeing attempts to activate emergency launch protocols," Corporal Wilson reported from his monitoring station. "Someone's trying to bypass normal command authorization and initiate launch sequences directly." Catherine's blood ran cold. Emergency launch protocols were designed to allow nuclear weapons to be deployed even if normal command structures were compromised, such as during a nuclear attack that had destroyed primary communication systems. In the wrong hands, these protocols could be used to launch nuclear weapons without any of the safeguards that normally prevented unauthorized use. "How close are they to success?" General Harper asked. Catherine analyzed the attack progress with the clinical precision of someone who understood every aspect of the systems under assault. "They've penetrated 60% of the authentication barriers. They need to overcome 3 more security layers before they can access launch authorization codes." Timeline? At current penetration rates, approximately 4 hours. The command center erupted into urgent activity as officers coordinated with military commands across the country. This wasn't just a security breach, it was potentially the beginning of an unauthorized nuclear launch that could trigger World War III. "Dr. Reed," General Harper said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible responsibility, "what options do we have?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, considering possibilities that violated every protocol in the manual. "Standard defensive measures aren't working. They're using our own emergency procedures against us, exploiting vulnerabilities that were built into the system for legitimate purposes." "Are you suggesting we disable the emergency protocols entirely?" "I'm suggesting we consider options that go beyond technical solutions." Catherine's expression was grim. "If we can't stop them from accessing launch authorization codes, we need to ensure those codes can't be used to actually launch nuclear weapons." Dr. Williams understood immediately. "You're talking about severing the connection between command systems and actual launch mechanisms." physically isolating the weapons from the control systems. That's never been done before, Colonel Bradley protested. We'd be cutting ourselves off from our own nuclear arsenal. Catherine looked around the room at faces that were beginning to understand the magnitude of the choice they were facing. Better to lose control of our weapons temporarily than to allow hostile actors to use them permanently. The debate was interrupted by an urgent alert from Corporal Wilson. "Ma'am, they've just penetrated the 7th security layer. They're now only 2 barriers away from launch authorization access." Catherine made a decision that would either save millions of lives or compromise America's nuclear deterrent capability. "I'm implementing emergency protocol, Omega Complete. Isolation of nuclear weapons from command systems." General Harper grabbed her arm. "Dr. Reed, that protocol has never been tested under operational conditions. You could permanently damage our nuclear command infrastructure." "Sir, if I don't implement it, we might not have a nuclear command infrastructure to worry about." Catherine's voice carried absolute certainty. "They're 6 hours away from gaining the ability to launch nuclear weapons against any target they choose." She began typing commands that would sever the connection between Fortress Ridge and the nuclear weapons it was supposed to control. It was the most drastic defensive measure possible, essentially destroying the village to save it. "Dr. Reed," Dr. Williams said quietly, "are you absolutely certain this is the right choice?" Catherine paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "That would implement a protocol that might prevent nuclear catastrophe or might cripple America's nuclear deterrent for years to come. I'm certain that the alternative is worse." She entered the final command sequence, and every nuclear weapon under Fortress Ridge's control became isolated from its command systems. The facility that had been designed to launch nuclear weapons in defense of America now had no ability to launch anything at all. "Protocol Omega is active," she announced to the stunned command center. "All nuclear weapons are now physically isolated from command systems. Launch authorization codes are no longer functional." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. They had prevented hostile actors from gaining control of nuclear weapons, but they had also rendered themselves defenseless. "Dr. Reed," General Harper said slowly, "what happens if we need to restore nuclear command capabilities?" Catherine's smile was grim. "Then we hope the people trying to break into our systems don't figure out how to reverse what I just did." Outside, in facilities around the world, sophisticated adversaries were discovering that their carefully planned operation had just encountered an obstacle they hadn't anticipated, someone willing to destroy the very thing they were trying to steal. The real test was just beginning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The immediate aftermath of Protocol Omega's implementation was chaos. Within minutes of Catherine's drastic action, secure communications lines were lighting up with calls from the Pentagon, NORAD, and the White House Situation Room. America's nuclear command structure had just lost control of a significant portion of its arsenal, and nobody above Fortress Ridge knew why. "General Harper, this is Defense Secretary Morrison," the secure phone crackled with barely controlled fury. "We're showing complete communication failure with all nuclear assets under your command. What the hell is happening down there?" "General." Harper looked at Catherine, who was still working frantically at her monitoring station, tracking the ongoing cyber assault that was now hitting walls instead of vulnerable systems. "Sir, we're implementing emergency defensive measures against a coordinated attack on our nuclear command infrastructure. Defensive measures that include cutting us off from our own weapons?" "Sir, the alternative was allowing hostile actors to gain control of those weapons." The line went silent for a long moment. When Defense Secretary Morrison's voice returned, it carried the weight of someone who understood they were facing an unprecedented crisis. General, I need a complete briefing on your situation. And I need it now. While General Harper coordinated with senior leadership, Catherine was discovering that their adversaries weren't giving up easily. The cyber attack was continuing, but now it was targeting different systems communications networks, personnel databases, and infrastructure controls that could be used to compromise the facility in other ways. They're adapting, she reported to Colonel Bradley, who was serving as acting commander while Harper dealt with Washington. Since they can't access launch codes, they're trying to access other critical systems. Life support, security systems, communication networks. Dr. Williams, who had been monitoring enemy attack patterns, looked up from her analysis with alarm. Dr. Reed, I think they're attempting to physically compromise the facility. If they can't control our nuclear weapons remotely, they might be trying to gain physical access to the installation. The implications were terrifying. Fortress Ridge was designed to be impregnable against external assault, but it had never been tested against adversaries who combined sophisticated cyber capabilities with detailed knowledge of the facility's internal systems. Corporal Wilson, Catherine called out, can you access external security monitors? Wilson's face went pale as he studied his screens. Ma'am, I'm seeing movement on the perimeter. Multiple contacts approaching from the North Ridge. There. Using advanced stealth technology, our standard sensors barely detect them. Catherine felt the familiar cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't just a cyber attack anymore. Their adversaries were escalating to direct physical assault, probably planning to capture the facility and gain manual control of nuclear weapon systems. How many contacts? Major Anderson demanded, already coordinating defensive responses. At least 12, possibly more, Wilson reported. Professional movement patterns, advanced equipment. This isn't a random terrorist attack, it's a military operation. Catherine's mind raced through the tactical implications. The attackers had spent years planning this operation, and they had contingencies for every defensive measure she could implement. Protocol Omega had prevented remote access to nuclear weapons, but if they gained physical control of the facility, they could potentially override her safeguards manually. Colonel Bradley, she said urgently, we need to implement physical security. Lockdown immediately. If they gain access to the command center, they can reverse Protocol Omega and restore launch capabilities. Already in progress, Bradley replied, his voice tight with controlled tension. All blast doors are sealed, security teams are in position, and we've requested immediate backup from regional military units. But Catherine knew that conventional security measures might not be enough against adversaries who had been preparing for this operation for years. They would have studied Fortress Ridge's defensive capabilities and developed countermeasures for every standard security protocol. Dr. Reed, Dr. Williams said quietly, there's something else we need to consider. If they can't gain remote or physical access to launch capabilities, they might have a third option. Catherine looked up from her monitoring station, already dreading what she was about to hear. Dirty bomb, Dr. Williams continued. If they can't launch nuclear weapons, they might try to breach the facility's nuclear material storage and create a radiological dispersal device. The possibility hit Catherine like a physical blow. Fortress Ridge maintained small quantities of nuclear materials for testing and maintenance purposes. In the wrong hands, those materials could be used to create a radioactive weapon that would contaminate hundreds of square miles and kill thousands of people. Can they access the nuclear materials storage? General Harper asked. Having returned from his call with Washington, Catherine was already analyzing the facility's internal security systems. Not remotely, those systems are physically isolated from all networks. But if they gain physical access to the facility, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood that a team of professional operators with detailed knowledge of Fortress Ridge's layout could potentially reach the nuclear materials storage especially if they had inside information about security protocols. "Sir, Sergeant," Lopez called out from his communication station. "I'm receiving reports of explosions at the outer perimeter. The assault team is using advanced breaching equipment to penetrate our defensive barriers." The sound of distant explosions reached the command center, muffled by layers of reinforced concrete, but still audible. Catherine realized that everything she'd done to prevent nuclear catastrophe might be meaningless if their adversaries succeeded in their physical assault. "General," she said, "we need to consider the possibility that standard defensive measures won't be sufficient. These aren't random terrorists, they're professional military operators with advanced equipment and detailed intelligence about our capabilities." General Harper studied the tactical displays showing enemy positions advancing toward the facility's critical systems. "Dr. Reed, what are you recommending?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, considering options that went beyond anything in the standard playbook. "I'm recommending we prepare for the possibility that they might succeed in breaching the facility. If they do, we need to ensure they can't access anything that could be used to create nuclear weapons or radiological devices." "You're talking about destroying our own nuclear materials?" "I'm talking about denying those materials to hostile actors, even if it means sacrificing our own capabilities." Catherine's voice carried the weight of terrible necessity. "Better to lose our nuclear materials than to allow them to be used against innocent civilians." Dr. Williams understood immediately. "Emergency protocol, Theta, complete destruction of all nuclear materials to prevent compromise." "That protocol has never been implemented," Colonel Bradley protested. "We'd be destroying irreplaceable strategic assets." Catherine looked around the command center at faces that were beginning to understand the magnitude of the choice they were facing. Strategic assets that become strategic liabilities if they fall into the wrong hands. The debate was interrupted by an urgent alert from the security teams. "Command, this is Perimeter Team Alpha. Enemy forces have breached the outer defensive line. They're advancing on the main facility using equipment that suggests they have detailed blueprints of our security systems." Catherine made another decision that would either save thousands of lives or destroy America's nuclear capabilities at Fortress Ridge. "I'm preparing Emergency Protocol Theta for implementation. If enemy forces breach the inner perimeter, we destroy all nuclear materials to prevent their use in radiological weapons." General Harper grabbed her shoulder. "Dr. Reed, that's a decision that should be made at the highest levels of government." "Sir, by the time we get authorization from the highest levels of government, those materials might already be in enemy hands." Catherine's eyes carried the cold calculation of someone who understood that preventing mass casualties might require sacrificing everything else. She began entering preliminary commands that would prepare the facility's nuclear materials for emergency destruction. It was the second most drastic measure possible after Protocol Omega. Protocol Theta would ensure that Fortress Ridge posed no threat to anyone, including America itself. "Dr. Reed," Dr. Williams said quietly, "are you prepared for the consequences of what you're about to do?" Catherine paused, her fingers hovering over commands that would irreversibly destroy strategic nuclear assets worth billions of dollars and decades of research. "I'm prepared for the consequences of not doing it." Outside, professional operators were advancing through defensive barriers that had been designed to stop conventional military assault. But Catherine Reed wasn't conventional, and neither were the measures she was prepared to take to prevent nuclear catastrophe. The most dangerous phase of the crisis was about to begin. The breach alarm screamed through Fortress Ridge as enemy forces penetrated the facility's inner perimeter. Catherine watched the security monitors with growing alarm as professional operators moved through corridors that should have been impregnable, using equipment and tactics that suggested they had detailed blueprints of the facility's layout. "They're heading directly for the nuclear materials storage," Major Anderson reported, her voice tight with controlled panic. They're not searching. Randomly, they know exactly where they're going. Catherine's worst fears were being confirmed. The attackers weren't just sophisticated cyber warriors. They were a coordinated team with intelligence assets that had provided them with detailed information about Fortress Ridge's most sensitive areas. How long until they reached the storage facility? General Harper demanded. Corporal Wilson was tracking the enemy's progress through the facility's internal security systems. At current advance rates, approximately 15 minutes, sir. Catherine looked at the protocol theta activation sequence on her screen. 15 minutes to decide whether to destroy billions of dollars in nuclear materials or risk them falling into hostile hands. It was the kind of decision that should require presidential authorization, but there was no time for normal command procedures. Dr. Reed, Dr. Williams said quietly, there might be another option. Catherine looked up from her controls, hoping for an alternative that didn't require destroying irreplaceable strategic assets. What are you thinking? The attackers are using our own security systems against us, just like they did with the cyber attack. But you designed those systems. You understand their vulnerabilities better than anyone else. Dr. Williams gestured toward the monitoring stations. Instead of destroying the nuclear materials, what if we could trap the attackers inside the TIA storage facility? The idea was audacious and dangerous. Catherine would have to allow enemy forces to approach the nuclear materials storage, then use her knowledge of the facility's security systems to seal them inside, essentially turning the storage facility into a high-tech prison. It's risky, Catherine said, considering the technical challenges. If the containment fails, they get access to nuclear materials. If it succeeds, we have hostile operators trapped inside our most sensitive facility. But the materials would be secure, General Harper pointed out. And we'd have captured the entire assault team for interrogation. Catherine was already analyzing the facility's containment systems, her mind racing through technical specifications and security protocols. I can modify the storage facility's lockdown systems to create an inescapable containment field. But I'll need to wait until they're all inside the facility. If even one operator remains outside, they could potentially override the containment from external access points. How will you know when they're all inside? Colonel Bradley asked. Catherine's fingers flew across her keyboard as she accessed the storage facility's internal monitoring systems. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, and biometric scanners. I can track every person who enters the facility and ensure none of them leave. The plan was forming rapidly, but it required precise timing and flawless execution. Catherine would have to monitor the enemy assault team's movement through the facility, wait for them to fully commit to the nuclear materials storage area, then trap them inside using security systems that had never been tested under operational conditions. Dr. Reed, Sergeant Lopez called out, the assault team has reached the storage facility perimeter. They're using advanced cutting tools to breach the outer security barriers. Catherine watched her monitors as sophisticated adversaries systematically overcame defenses that had been designed to stop the most determined attackers. Their equipment was military-grade, their tactics were professional, and their knowledge of the facility's security systems was disturbingly accurate. They're inside the outer containment area, she reported to the command center. 6 operators, all carrying equipment consistent with nuclear materials extraction and transport. The enemy team was moving with the confidence of professionals who had rehearsed this operation countless times. They knew exactly which security systems to bypass, which barriers to breach, and which routes would get them to the nuclear materials with maximum efficiency. Dr. Reed, Dr. Williams said urgently, they're approaching the primary storage vault. If you're going to implement containment, it needs to be now. Catherine hesitated for a fraction of a second, knowing that her next decision would either capture a dangerous enemy team or potentially give them access to materials that could be used to create radiological weapons. Not yet. I need all 6 operators inside the vault area before I can ensure complete containment. The tension in the command center was palpable as everyone watched the monitors, knowing that America's nuclear security was balanced on the edge of a knife. If Catherine's plan failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. 5 operators are inside the vault, Corporal Wilson reported. The 6th is maintaining overwatch at the entrance. Catherine's heart sank. The containment plan required all attackers to be inside the vault area, but professional operators always maintain security overwatch, exactly the kind of tactical discipline that could defeat her trap. Dr. Reed, General Harper said quietly, we may need to implement Protocol Theta after all. Catherine stared at her monitors, watching hostile operators approach nuclear materials, while their overwatch maintained an escape route that would allow them to extract with radioactive materials. The mathematical certainty of tactical failure was overwhelming. Then Corporal Wilson made an observation that changed everything. Ma'am, the overwatch operator is moving toward the vault entrance. It looks like he's providing close security. For the extraction team. Catherine's training kicked in as she realized the enemy team was making a tactical error. Professional discipline demanded maintaining overwatch, but the complexity of extracting nuclear materials was requiring all 6 operators to work in close coordination. All operators are now inside the vault area, she announced to the command center. Implementing containment protocol now. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she activated security systems that had never been used in combat conditions. Emergency blast doors sealed the storage facility. Ventilation systems were isolated to prevent gas-based escape attempts. Communication. Jammers activated to prevent coordination with external support teams. Most critically, the vault's internal security systems were modified to prevent any exit until authorized by command personnel. The 6 enemy operators who had spent years planning this operation were now trapped inside the facility they had tried to compromise. Containment is active, Catherine reported. All hostile operators are secured inside the nuclear materials storage facility with no possibility of escape or extraction. The command center erupted in cheers and relieved conversation, but Catherine remained focused on her monitors. The immediate crisis was over, but the implications were just beginning to unfold. Dr. Reed, General Harper said, his voice carrying genuine respect for the first time since she'd revealed her true background. That was the most brilliant piece of tactical thinking I've ever witnessed. You turned our own security systems into a weapon against the people trying to compromise them. Catherine was quiet for a moment, studying the containment status displays that showed 6 hostile operators secured inside America's most sensitive nuclear facility. Sir, this was just the immediate crisis. We still need to determine who they are, who sent them, and whether this operation was part of a larger coordinated attack. Dr. Williams approached Catherine's workstation with obvious admiration. Dr. Reed, the technical expertise required to modify containment systems in real time, while under active assault, that's doctoral-level systems. Engineering applied under combat conditions. That's what I was trained for, Catherine replied. Simply, the question now is what we do with 6 captured enemy operators and the intelligence they might provide about whoever planned this operation. Major Anderson was already coordinating with intelligence agencies and military commands across the country. Dr. Reed, you've not only prevented a potential nuclear catastrophe, you've captured what appears to be a state-sponsored assault team. The intelligence value alone could be unprecedented. Catherine looked around the command center at faces that no longer saw her as just a secretary with administrative duties. The quiet woman who had been dismissed and overlooked for 18 months had just prevented what could have been the most devastating attack on American nuclear security in history. Ma'am, Corporal Wilson said quietly, how did you know the containment system would work? Those protocols have never been tested under operational conditions. Catherine's smile carried the confidence of someone who had finally been allowed to use her expertise to its fullest potential. Because I helped design those systems 6 years ago. I knew exactly how they would respond under stress conditions. Because I'd run the calculations during the original development process. The circle was closing, but Catherine understood that this victory was just the beginning of a much larger investigation into who had planned this operation and whether similar attacks were being prepared against other nuclear facilities. For the first time in 18 months, her expertise was being fully utilized and genuinely appreciated. The question was whether it would be enough to prevent the next crisis that was already being planned by adversaries who had just learned that America's nuclear security was more sophisticated than they had anticipated. While Catherine had successfully contained the physical assault team, the cyber warfare operation was far from over. Dr. Nikolai Orlov, monitoring the failed infiltration from his command center 3,000 miles away, realized that his carefully planned operation had encountered something he hadn't anticipated. An adversary who understood nuclear security systems better than his own technical specialists. "The American facility has trapped our assault team," Pavel Morozov reported, his voice tight with professional frustration. "Their security systems have been modified in real time to create an inescapable containment field." Orlov studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. "How is that possible? Our technical specifications indicated that American nuclear facilities use standardized security protocols with known vulnerabilities. Someone at the facility has advanced knowledge of nuclear security systems. The countermeasures they've implemented suggest doctoral-level expertise in nuclear command architecture." Morozov's analysis was grimly accurate. "They're not just defending against our attacks, they're using our own tactics against us." Meanwhile, at Fortress Ridge, Catherine was discovering that capturing the assault team was only the beginning of a much larger battle. The cyber attack was continuing, but now it was targeting different systems, not just nuclear command interfaces, but the facility's entire information infrastructure. "They're trying to gather intelligence about our defensive capabilities," she explained to the emergency briefing that General Harper had convened. "Since their primary operation failed, they're conducting damage assessment and intelligence gathering to understand how we defeated them." Dr. Williams, who had been monitoring the ongoing cyber intrusion, looked up from her analysis with alarm. "Dr. Reed, I think they're also trying to gather information about you specifically. The attack pattern suggests they're targeting personnel databases, security clearance records, and technical documentation related to nuclear systems design." The implications were chilling. If hostile intelligence services could identify Catherine as the person responsible for defeating their operation, they might target her directly, either for elimination or for recruitment. Her knowledge of nuclear security vulnerabilities made her one of the most valuable and dangerous people in America. "Colonel Bradley," Catherine said urgently, "we need to implement information security lockdown immediately. If they gather intelligence about my background and capabilities, they'll be able to develop countermeasures for future operations." "Already in progress," Bradley replied. "All personnel files have been moved to isolated systems, and we've implemented communications blackout to prevent intelligence extraction." But Catherine knew that conventional information security measures might not be enough against adversaries who had demonstrated the ability to exploit vulnerabilities that even she hadn't anticipated. They had turned America's own nuclear security protocols into weapons. They could probably do the same with information security systems. "Dr. Reed," General Harper said, "we need to consider the possibility that this operation was a test. A way for hostile actors to assess our defensive capabilities and identify our key personnel." Catherine had been thinking the same thing. The attack had been too sophisticated and too well coordinated to be a random operation. It felt like a probe way for adversaries to understand how America would respond to a nuclear security crisis. "Sir, if this was a test, then they've learned. Several things that will make future operations more dangerous, she said. They've learned that we have advanced defensive capabilities they didn't know about. They've learned that we have personnel with expertise that exceeds their intelligence estimates. And they've learned that we're willing to take drastic measures to protect nuclear assets. The secure phone rang, interrupting the briefing. General Harper answered, his face growing grave as he listened to the caller. Yes, sir. Understood. We'll implement immediately. He hung up and looked around the room with an expression that made everyone understand they were facing an even larger crisis. That was the Secretary of Defense. Intelligence agencies have detected similar cyber attacks on nuclear facilities in 12 countries. This wasn't just an attack on American nuclear security, it was a coordinated global assault on nuclear command systems worldwide. The scope of the operation was staggering. Catherine realized they weren't just dealing with a sophisticated attack. On Fortress Ridge, they were facing a coordinated attempt to compromise nuclear security systems around the world. Dr. Reed, Dr. Williams said quietly, if they've been testing nuclear facilities globally, they've been gathering intelligence about defensive capabilities and vulnerabilities across multiple nuclear powers. The information they've collected could be used to develop attacks that no single country could defend against. Catherine felt the weight of terrible responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her expertise had been crucial in defending Fortress Ridge, but the knowledge she possessed about nuclear security vulnerabilities could be equally valuable to hostile actors who wanted to exploit those vulnerabilities. General, she said, I need to brief intelligence agencies about the technical methods these adversaries used. If they're conducting similar operations worldwide, other nuclear facilities need to understand what they're facing. Dr. Reed, that would require revealing classified information about nuclear security systems to personnel who don't have appropriate clearances, Colonel Bradley pointed out. Catherine's expression was grim. Sir, the alternative is allowing other nuclear facilities to be compromised because they don't understand the sophistication of the threat they're facing. The debate was interrupted by an urgent alert from Corporal Wilson. Ma'am, I'm detecting new cyber intrusion attempts. But these are different. They're coming from multiple sources simultaneously, and they're using attack vectors that we haven't seen before. Catherine moved quickly to her monitoring station, her trained eye immediately recognizing that they were facing a new phase of the cyber assault. They're using distributed attack methods coordinating intrusion attempts from multiple command centers to overwhelm our defensive systems. The attackers had learned from their initial failure and were now implementing more sophisticated tactics. Instead of trying to penetrate Fortress Ridge's defenses with a single coordinated assault, they were using multiple simultaneous attacks to create more targets than the defensive systems could handle. Can we stop them? Major Anderson asked. Catherine studied the attack patterns, her mind racing through defensive countermeasures and technical solutions. Not with conventional defensive methods. They're using our own defensive protocols against us. Every countermeasure we implement, they're adapting to overcome. What are you recommending? Catherine was quiet for a moment, considering options that went beyond anything in the standard cybersecurity playbook. I'm recommending we go on the offensive. Instead of just defending against their attacks, we need to attack their command systems directly. General Harper looked startled. Dr. Reed, that would constitute cyber warfare against foreign targets. That's a decision that requires presidential authorization. Sir, they've already initiated cyber warfare against American nuclear facilities. Catherine replied. At what point does defensive response become justified offensive action? The question hung in the air as everyone grappled with the implications. Catherine was suggesting that they use her expertise not just to defend Fortress Ridge, but to actively attack the adversaries who were threatening nuclear security worldwide. Dr. Reed, Dr. Williams said carefully, do you have the capability to conduct offensive cyber operations against their command systems? Catherine's smile was cold as winter wind. I have the capability to do a lot of things that I've never been authorized to do. The question is whether we're willing to use all available options to prevent nuclear catastrophe. She turned to General Harper with an expression that carried the weight of terrible knowledge. Sir, I can defend Fortress Ridge indefinitely. But I can't defend every nuclear facility in the world. If we want to stop this threat permanently, we need to eliminate it at its source. The room fell silent as everyone understood that Catherine was proposing to take the battle directly to the adversaries who had been attacking nuclear facilities worldwide. It was a decision that would either end the crisis or escalate it into something far more dangerous. Dr. Reed, General Harper said slowly, "What exactly are you proposing?" Catherine opened her laptop and began displaying technical diagrams that showed global network connections and cyber warfare capabilities that most people didn't know existed. "I'm proposing that we use the same tactics they used against us. But better." The real cyber war was about to begin, and Catherine Reed was preparing to take it to the enemy. The authorization came directly from the White House at 15:47 hours. President Harrison, after emergency consultations with the National Security Council, had made a decision that would either prevent global nuclear catastrophe or escalate cyber warfare to unprecedented levels. Dr. Reed, General Harper, announced to the command center, "You are hereby authorized to conduct offensive cyber operations against hostile targets threatening American nuclear security. Rules of engagement are classified at the highest levels. You have complete tactical discretion." Catherine felt the weight of that authorization settle on her shoulders. For the first time in her career, she had been given unlimited authority to use her expertise in nuclear systems and cyber warfare without restrictions or oversight. It was the kind of responsibility that could save the world or destroy it. "Sir, I'll need complete access to Fortress Ridge's quantum computing systems and direct connection to military cyber warfare networks," she said, already planning an operation that would either eliminate the global threat or provoke retaliation that could trigger international conflict. Dr. Williams approached Catherine's workstation with obvious concern. "Dr. Reed, what you're proposing is essentially a cyber warfare version of nuclear deterrence. Mutually assured destruction through network compromise." "That's exactly what it is," Catherine replied, her fingers flying across keyboards as she accessed systems that most people didn't know existed. "They've demonstrated the ability to threaten nuclear facilities worldwide. We need to demonstrate that attacking American nuclear security comes with consequences they can't accept." The plan Catherine was developing was audacious and dangerous. Instead of just defending against cyber attacks, she would use her knowledge of nuclear command systems to identify and target the adversaries' own nuclear and military infrastructure. It was cyber warfare at the highest possible level, nation-state against nation-state, with nuclear weapons as the ultimate stakes. "Dr. Reed," Corporal Wilson called out from his monitoring station, "I'm detecting increased cyber activity from the same sources that attacked us. They appear to be preparing for a major escalation." Catherine studied the attack patterns, recognizing the signatures of preparation for massive coordinated assault. "They're mobilizing everything they have. This isn't just about Fortress Ridge anymore. They're preparing to attack every nuclear facility they can reach simultaneously." The scope of the threat was becoming clear. The adversaries weren't just trying to compromise American nuclear security. They were attempting to create global nuclear chaos that could trigger conflicts worldwide. It was cyber warfare designed to destabilize the entire international order. Timeline for their next assault? General Harper asked. Catherine analyzed the preparation patterns with the precision of someone who understood both nuclear systems and cyber warfare at the doctoral level. "Based on the resource mobilization I'm observing, approximately 6 hours. But this won't be like their previous attacks. This will be an all-out assault designed to overwhelm every defensive system simultaneously. Can conventional defenses stop them? Not if they coordinate attacks on multiple countries simultaneously, Catherine replied grimly. Nuclear facilities worldwide don't have the defensive capabilities to withstand the kind of coordinated assault they're preparing. She made a decision that would either save millions of lives or trigger the first nuclear cyber war in history. I'm implementing Operation Mirror Strike offensive cyber warfare, targeting their command and control systems directly. Catherine's plan was elegant and terrifying. She would use her intimate knowledge of nuclear command systems to identify vulnerabilities in the adversary's own nuclear infrastructure, then exploit those vulnerabilities to demonstrate that cyber attacks on nuclear facilities were a weapon. That cut both ways. Dr. Reed, Dr. Williams said quietly, "Are you certain this won't escalate beyond cyber warfare? If you compromise their nuclear systems, they might interpret that as a prelude to actual nuclear attack." Catherine paused in her preparations, considering the implications of what she was about to do. Dr. Williams, they've already escalated beyond acceptable limits. They've attacked nuclear facilities in 12 countries. The question isn't whether this will escalate. The question is whether we can control the escalation. She began implementing attack protocols that had never been used in operational conditions. Her targets weren't nuclear weapons themselves. She wasn't trying to trigger launches or create catastrophic failures. Instead, she was targeting the command and communication systems that allowed coordinated cyber warfare operations. "I'm not attacking their nuclear weapons," she explained to the tense command center. "I'm attacking their ability to attack ours." The offensive operation began at 16:23 hours, with surgical precision that demonstrated why Catherine had been considered one of the world's foremost experts in nuclear security systems. She identified command centers, communication networks, and coordination systems that were enabling the global cyber assault, then systematically disabled them using techniques that the adversaries couldn't counter because they were based on vulnerabilities in systems they didn't know Catherine understood. "Target 1 is neutralized," she reported as enemy command center communications went dark. "Target 2 is experiencing cascading system failures. Target 3 has lost coordination capabilities with field operations." Dr. Nikolai Orlov, watching his carefully coordinated global operation collapse in real time, realized that he was facing an adversary whose capabilities exceeded anything his intelligence services had anticipated. The American nuclear facility wasn't just defending itself, it was actively dismantling his entire cyber warfare infrastructure. How is this possible? He demanded of his technical specialists. They're attacking systems that aren't connected to any networks they should have access to. Pavel Morozov's analysis was grimly accurate. They're using vulnerabilities in our own nuclear command systems against us. Someone with doctoral-level expertise in nuclear security architecture is exploiting weaknesses we didn't know existed. At Fortress Ridge, Catherine was discovering that her offensive cyber operations were more effective than she'd anticipated. The adversaries had spent years preparing attacks on American nuclear systems, but they hadn't prepared defenses against someone who understood their own nuclear systems better than they did. Dr. Reed, Major Anderson reported, "Intelligence agencies are confirming that cyber attacks on nuclear facilities worldwide are failing. Their coordination has been completely disrupted." Catherine continued her systematic dismantling of enemy cyber warfare capabilities, using techniques that would render them incapable of coordinating similar attacks for years to come. "I'm implementing permanent defensive modifications to their command systems. They'll be able to restore basic functionality, but they won't be able to conduct coordinated cyber warfare operations." "How permanent?" General Harper asked. Catherine's expression was grim as she considered the long-term implications of what she was doing. I'm embedding defensive protocols in their own systems that will prevent future coordination of attacks on nuclear facilities. Think of it as a cyber warfare. Vaccine, they'll be immune to their own techniques. The operation was succeeding beyond her most optimistic projections, but Catherine understood that success came with consequences. She had just demonstrated capabilities that would fundamentally change the balance of cyber warfare worldwide. Dr. Reed, Dr. Williams said quietly, you've essentially ended their ability to conduct nuclear cyber warfare. But you've also demonstrated that America has capabilities that no other country knew existed. Catherine nodded, understanding that operation. Mirror Strike had achieved its immediate objective while creating new strategic challenges. Dr. Williams, sometimes preventing catastrophe requires revealing capabilities that you'd prefer to keep secret. She implemented the final phase of her operation, defensive protocols that would protect nuclear facilities worldwide from the kinds of attacks that had nearly succeeded at Fortress Ridge. It was her gift to global nuclear security, embedded in systems that would prevent similar crises for decades to come. Operation Mirror Strike is complete, she announced to the command center. Global cyber threats to nuclear facilities have been neutralized. Enemy coordination capabilities have been permanently degraded. The room erupted in cheers and relieved conversation, but Catherine remained focused on her monitoring systems. The immediate crisis was over, but the implications of what she'd accomplished would reshape cyber warfare doctrine for years to come. Dr. Reed, General Harper said, his voice carrying genuine awe, you've just prevented what could have been the most devastating cyber attack in history. How do we even begin to understand what you've accomplished? Catherine was quiet for a moment, studying the global network displays that showed nuclear facilities worldwide now, protected by defensive systems that she'd embedded during her offensive operation. Sir, what I've accomplished is ensuring that the quiet secretary with the coffee pot will never again be the only thing standing between nuclear weapons and the people who want to misuse them. The crisis was over, but Catherine Reed's transformation from overlooked administrator to the person who had saved the world was just beginning to be understood. 6 months after the crisis that nearly triggered global nuclear catastrophe, Dr. Catherine Reed stood before a joint session of Congress, receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. But for Catherine, the most meaningful change wasn't the recognition or the awards. It was the transformation in how her expertise was valued and utilized. The aftermath of Operation Mirror Strike had reshaped American nuclear security doctrine and Catherine's role within it. The quiet secretary who had been dismissed for 18 months was now Director of Nuclear Systems Security, with authority over defensive protocols at every nuclear facility in the United States. Dr. Reed, President Harrison had said during their private meeting at the White House, your actions prevented what intelligence agencies estimate could have been the most devastating attack on global nuclear security in history. But more than that, you've shown us the importance of recognizing expertise wherever it exists, regardless of the position someone holds. The investigation into the crisis had revealed the full scope of what Catherine had faced. The cyber warfare operation had been coordinated by a coalition of hostile nation-states, using technical specifications stolen from the Lawrence Livermore breach to target nuclear facilities in 17 countries. Without Catherine's intervention, the coordinated assault could have compromised nuclear security systems worldwide, potentially triggering conflicts that could have escalated to nuclear warfare. But perhaps more importantly, the investigation had revealed the systemic failures that had allowed Catherine's expertise to be overlooked for 18 months. The same assumptions and prejudices that had dismissed her technical insights had been replicated at nuclear facilities worldwide, creating vulnerabilities that hostile actors had been prepared to exploit. The Fortress Ridge incident, as it was now known in classified intelligence circles, had triggered a complete review of personnel management at sensitive facilities. Nuclear installations across the country were implementing new protocols to ensure that expertise was recognized and utilized, regardless of official job classifications. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had become Catherine's deputy director, often reflected on the lessons learned from the crisis. "The most dangerous assumption we can make," she said during a security briefing, "is that we know who the experts are based on their job titles rather than their actual capabilities." At Fortress Ridge itself, the transformation was even more dramatic. The facility that had once been vulnerable to sophisticated cyber warfare was now a model for nuclear security worldwide. The defensive protocols Catherine had developed were being implemented at nuclear facilities across the globe, creating a network of protection that made coordinated attacks virtually impossible. General Harper, who had been promoted to head the newly created Nuclear Security Command, made a point of visiting Fortress Ridge regularly. "Dr. Reed," he said during one such visit, "I owe you an apology that goes beyond words. For 18 months, we had one of the world's foremost experts in nuclear security working in our facility, and we treated her like office furniture." Catherine's response was characteristic of the grace she'd shown throughout her transformation. "General, the important thing isn't the mistakes we made, it's what we learned from them. Every nuclear facility is now better protected because we learned to value expertise over assumptions." The 6 enemy operators who had been captured during the physical assault remained in federal custody, providing intelligence that had led to the disruption of similar operations worldwide. Their interrogation had revealed that Catherine's reputation as a nuclear systems expert had become legendary in hostile intelligence circles. She was now considered one of the most dangerous opponents to anyone planning attacks on nuclear facilities. Dr. Reed, one of the captured operatives, had said during his interrogation, "We spent 3 years planning this operation, studying every aspect of American nuclear security. But nobody told us about the woman with the coffee pot who understood our plans better than we did." Corporal Wilson, now Sergeant Wilson, and serving as Catherine's technical liaison, often joked about the transformation he'd witnessed. "Ma'am, 18 months ago, you were the secretary who everybody ignored. Now you're the person that enemy intelligence services have nightmares about." But for Catherine, the most meaningful changes were smaller and more personal. When she suggested modifications to security protocols, officers listened carefully and implemented her recommendations immediately. When she identified potential vulnerabilities, intelligence agencies treated her assessments as top priority. When she trained other personnel in nuclear security techniques, they understood they were learning from someone who had prevented global catastrophe. The coffee pot in the Fortress Ridge break room now carried a small plaque in memory of Dr. Catherine Reed's 18 months as the most important person nobody noticed. It was Colonel Bradley's idea, a reminder that expertise could exist anywhere and that the most critical capabilities might belong to the quietest people in the room. During evening briefings, when new personnel asked about the facility's legendary security record, senior officers would tell them about the secretary who had saved the world. The story had become part of Fortress Ridge's culture, a reminder that assumptions could be dangerous and that everyone's contributions mattered. "The thing about Dr. Reed," Major Anderson would explain to new arrivals, "is that she spent 18 months watching, learning, and preparing while everyone else was making assumptions. When the crisis came, she was the only person ready for it." Catherine's personal office now displayed technical awards and recognition from nuclear security agencies worldwide. But the item she valued most was simpler: a handwritten thank you note from a young technician at a nuclear facility in France, where Catherine's defensive protocols had prevented a cyber attack that could have compromised European nuclear security. "Dr. Reed," the note read, "because of the systems you designed, my children will grow up in a world where nuclear facilities are protected by the best security measures that human expertise can create. Thank you for being smarter than the people." who wanted to hurt us. Dr. Williams often asked Catherine how she felt about the transformation from ignored secretary to globally recognized expert. Catherine's response was always the same. The expertise was always there. The only thing that changed was that people finally learned to listen. During quiet moments in her new office, Catherine would sometimes look out at the mountains where enemy operatives had once planned to compromise American nuclear security. The landscape hadn't changed, but everything else had. Nuclear facilities worldwide were now protected by defensive systems that made the kind of coordinated attack she'd faced virtually impossible. More importantly, personnel at those facilities understood that expertise could exist anywhere, that the quiet person with the clipboard might be the most important person in the room, and that assumptions about who was qualified to assess threats could be more dangerous than the threats themselves. The final report on the Fortress Ridge incident concluded with a recommendation that became standard policy at sensitive facilities. Worldwide, security depends not just on technology and procedures, but on recognizing and utilizing human expertise wherever it exists. The most dangerous vulnerability is not technical. It's the assumption that we know who our experts are. Catherine Reed had learned to make herself invisible long before she ever arrived at Fortress Ridge, but she'd also learned something more important, that sometimes the most critical thing an expert could do was ensure they were finally seen. 6 months later, when a new logistics coordinator arrived at Fortress Ridge, the first thing Colonel Bradley told her was simple: listen to what everyone says. Write down what they recommend. Do what the experts tell you to do. Because the quiet person with the clipboard might know things that could save the world. Never underestimate the observer. They see everything, including things you don't know. You need to see. Sometimes the hero isn't the one charging forward. Sometimes the hero is the one who's been quietly ready all along. And sometimes, preventing nuclear catastrophe starts with recognizing that the most important person in the room might be the one everybody's been ignoring. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.